आज हम विज़िट करेंगे क्वींस हाउस जो कि हमारे आज की सैर का हिस्सा है क्वींस हाउस इन ग्रीनिच and it's part of our day out today. The Queen's House in Greenwich is one of the most fascinating buildings in the country. It is architecturally important as well as being famous for its former royal occupants and its vast art collection. It even has its own ghost, if legend is to be believed. As the first classical villa to be built in England, the Queen's House was very different from the traditional Tudor and Gothic styles which came before. The architect Inigo Jones was commissioned to design the building in 1616 by Anne of Denmark, James I's wife, supposedly a gift from the king as an apology for swearing in front of her after she accidentally shot one of his favorite dogs during a hunt. Today, the Queen's House is home to an incredible collection of art featuring works by famous artists. You can also see the iconic Armada portrait of Elizabeth I, commemorating the failed invasion of England by the Spanish Armada in the summer of 1588. The first interior to envelop you is the Great Hall. Inigo Jones conceived it as a perfect Palladian cube, 40 feet in length, breadth, and height. You are surrounded by space and angled light. Spin slowly around and you will see casement windows spilling sunshine, an encircling gallery floor carried by oak cantilever brackets and doorways framed by paneled pilasters of Portland stone. Beneath your feet is a black and white marble floor laid in 1636 by Charles I, aptly named Master Mason Nicholas. Its pleasingly hypnotic geometric design, tessellating diamonds forming circles, rectangles, and ovals, and is echoed on the ceiling by the arrangement of the gilded timbers so that your eyes are sent up and down and then back up again. Sunlight pouring onto dazzling geometric patterns, brilliant white colonnades casting rods of shadow across antique flagstones, a swirling vortex of a staircase. The Queen's House in Greenwich is something of an overwhelming architecture experience. Timeless, of course, is a word that gets thrown around a lot nowadays. But in the case of the Queen's House, it's not just appropriate, but accurate in the sense that the Queen's House has never been of a particular period in time. When the building was commissioned in 1616, its design was simultaneously ancient and shockingly futuristic. The Queen's House was the first consciously classical building in Britain, and its very antiquity was astonishingly ahead of its time. Anne died years before the building was finished in 1635, and it was Charles I's consort, Henrietta Maria, who inherited this strange new masterpiece. The clean lines, fluted columns, and bright Portland stone facing were utterly unlike the rambling red brick royal houses of Tudor. To Henrietta Maria and her ladies, the White House, as it quickly became known, must have seemed otherworldly. But is it really possible to get a sense of what it would be like to live in the Queen's House, to see it as Henrietta Maria or Mary or Anne would have seen it? The building has been part of the National Maritime Museum since the 1930s, displaying its collection of marine art to innumerable tourists. But today, thanks to an extensive restoration and refurbishment in 2016, it feels much more like a house and less like a museum than in previous decades, and is probably closer to Inigo Jones' original version than it has been for 4 centuries. The tulip staircase, the doors and windows And rooms like the Queen's bedchamber and the cabinet room are all now essentially as the first intended queenly resident. Anne of Denmark should have seen them in about 1630. Not everything is of the 17th century. The gilded floral motifs on the Great Hall ceilings are the sensitive embellishments of contemporary artist Richard Wright. But then, Inigo Jones' beautifully timeless Queen's House never was of the 17th century. As the Nobel winning Turkish author Orhan Pamuk wrote, in poetically well built museums, formed from the heart's compulsions, we are consoled not by finding in them old objects that we love, but by losing all sense of time. In recent years, the Queen's House has exhibited some of Royal Museum's finest artworks, including paintings by Lely, Hogarth, Gainsborough, Reynolds, Hodges, and the Van de Veldes. This breathtaking collection is available to visit for free, all situated in the gorgeous Queen's House. Visitors can see the elements of the house's original splendor, including the grotesque style painted ceiling of the Queen's chamber, the ironwork of the tulip stairs, the original painted woodwork of the Great Hall, and its finely laid 1630s marble floor. And crowning the Queen's House's artistic splendors is a spectacular ceiling fresco in gold leaf by Turner Prize winner Richard Wright. Greenwich has had royal connections since the 9th century, but it was the Tudors who really put Greenwich Palace on the map. The borough's riverside location, protected hunting grounds, and distance from the crowds made it the perfect spot for kings and queens hoping to escape the crowds of London. Both Henry VIII and Elizabeth I were born here. Charles II founded the Royal Observatory, and many other monarchs left their mark on this historic area. The Queen's House was used by members of the royal family until 1805, when George III granted the Queen's House to a charity for the orphans of seamen. In 1934, the building was taken over by the National Maritime Museum. Now, the Queen's House is a beautiful art gallery, home to an ever-changing display of both historic and contemporary works from various artists. The iconic Armada portrait commemorates the most famous conflict of Elizabeth I's reign, the failed invasion of England by the Spanish Armada in summer 1588. The painting is on permanent public display in the Queen's Presence Chamber in the Queen's House, on the site of the original Greenwich Palace, the birthplace of Elizabeth I. Today, the Queen's House is a reclaimed art gallery containing over 450 artworks. There is a portrait of Henry VIII, also William and Catherine Kerr's portrait, Ship of Fools painting is there, and then Anne of Denmark's painting is there as well, her portrait. The Armada portrait of Elizabeth I is beautiful, wearing a pearl encrusted dress and with her hand resting on a terrestrial globe. Queen Elizabeth I is portrayed as a spectacle of female power and majesty. While the identity of the artist is unknown, the painting was made to commemorate the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, the most famous conflict of Elizabeth's reign. To the left of Elizabeth, the English fleet and the approaching Spanish armada can be seen. To her right, the armada is being wrecked in a storm. The portrait was acquired by Royal Museum Greenwich in 2016. You will also find the portraits of Queen Henrietta Maria and Charles I in the Queen's house. Mary I of England and Philip II of Spain's portrait is also there. Britain's first and surely still its most beautiful self-supporting spiral staircase is both an architectural and aesthetic wonder. Each step is cantilevered directly from the wall and held aloft by the tread below, and winding around is a continuous balustrade of wrought iron with bars fashioned into leaves and tulip flowers and colored in a vivid blue paint made from crushed glass. The effect is a curious feeling of delicacy and strength. As you climb, it's hard to decide what's better, the staircase itself or the incredible view through the window, which looks out onto the rolling sweep of Greenwich Park and the famous Christopher Wren Observatory at its summit. The real view, of course, is from the front of the house. In fact, the 115-foot wide vista down to the Thames is so magnificent that it is specifically protected as part of the Queen's House's status as a scheduled monument. The Royal Observatory, home of Greenwich Mean Time and the Prime Meridian, is located within Greenwich Park at the top of the steep hill, overlooking the Queen's House and the National Maritime Museum. The Royal Observatory is managed as part of the National Maritime Museum and contains the Astronomy Centre and the Meridian Courtyard, as well as the Peter Harrison Planetarium, London's only planetarium.